Good morning, everyone. I'm Zilia Lavastida Lopez, Senior Engineering Manager at Agile in the admission and care delivery domain.
And I'm Rebecca Reich. I'm one of the directors of engineering at Agile. Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Rebecca Reich, je suis une des directrices d'ingénierie chez Agile. On peut répondre aux questions à la fin en français si au besoin.
So for those of you who don't know Agile, we're basically a purpose-driven tech company aiming to transform the home healthcare industry. We offer at Agile a SaaS platform that spans clinical documentation and back office functionality, including revenue cycle management, scheduling. We also provide a mobile app for care workers in the field, family portal app for families of the patients that our agencies give care to, and we also provide integration through our external APIs. Today, in Dare to Deliver, we want to take a closer look at some of the strategies that have positively impacted how we do feature development, motivation, and maintaining a steady pace in our teams.
Okay, so let's set the scene for what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to introduce you to a typical Agile software team, Team Cougar, and we're going to look at the project that team works on. We're then going to dive into their Agile ceremonies. So how does Team Cougar do their work? Then we're going to look at how the team sets goals, how those goals align at a company level with the company goals. Now, as the team is working, we like to measure how we're doing. Are we achieving what we're setting out to do? So we'll look at some metrics and how we measure as we go along how we're delivering. Now, sometimes out of those metrics, we find some areas that need some improvement. So we'll look into how do we have some difficult conversations with teams or individuals while keeping the team motivated. And finally, again, to keep that team motivated, we look at feedback. So we look at how our customers are actually using the product, whatever Team Cougar is developing, and giving that feedback back to the team to sort of close that loop. So let's set the scene and meet the team and the project. So this is Agile's Team Cougar. What I'm showing here are 6 of the team members. We have Miranda, the manager, Felipe, the front-end developer. We have Barbara and Betty, back-end developers. We have Quentin, QA, and Sergio, the staff engineer. We're not showing product managers here just because we're going to focus on the software on the engineering side. So this is Team Cougar, and we're going to look at the project that they're working on.
So as a home care software, patients are usually the center of our universe. One of the projects that Team Cougar recently worked on was taking into their hands the client profile redesign. And by clients in this case, we refer to patients. So we like to view the patients that home care agencies give service to as our clients. So the client profile redesign meant essentially having all the information around demographics, contacts, and medical history of clients, so patients, in an easy-to-access information architecture distribution, and in a way that it's clear and easy to differentiate what items are more important than others for the people that are organizing the care. What this meant is we moved from these screens where we had been accumulating a lot of those demographic fields over time to a screen that was better organized, so a focused client info section with the demographics, the address visible clearly on a map, and a section for contacts, a section for medical history. So client information visible at a glance. On the other hand, we, in what refers to organization of the care that needs to be delivered for that patient, we wanted to go from a packed care documentation section, including at the same time care plans and services and progress notes, into 2 separate sections that were one specific for care management and one for the care delivery itself. So care management would be setting up that care. For example, care plans, and care delivery would contain everything related to progress of that care being given to the patient. So progress notes, visit reports, visit signatures, etc. this was a typical project for Team Cougar. So once we had the team, like the setup of the team that's going to work on it and the type of project we want, what comes next is how do we organize to work efficiently and how do we divide this project? So one of the things that have changed a lot over the years and has evolved has been how we do Agile ceremonies through our different sprint teams in Alaya Care. And the reason that has evolved is we've tried to find a pace that allows us to have shorter ceremonies and more effective ones so that our team is engaged at all times during the ceremony and are focused on the items that are being discussed instead of multitasking on other things or losing attention span into something else. So this is what a typical 2-week sprint looks like for our teams. One thing that we've changed over the years has been how we end and how we start our sprints. So we like to view the start of the 2-week sprint as the ending of the previous one. So we, contrary to the belief that Mondays are slog and people don't have a lot of energy on Mondays, we found it was the other way around. Like when we had the ceremonies on the Fridays, people were tired from the week and they were maybe a little less, let's say, interested. So we found that by moving the closing ceremonies of the sprint to Monday, it was a way to start the week with a celebration of everything that we accomplished during the sprint. So on Mondays of the new sprint, we like to begin with a sprint review where we go over all the work that was done during the sprint. So basically the team demos, what they did during the sprint. And it's seen as an opportunity to showcase your work and give and receive feedback. After sprint reviews, we usually go on retrospective, and these sometimes we switch and we skip on one sprint, but in general, when we have them after every sprint, they're after the sprint review. And following that comes sprint planning. The reason we like to have it in between is so that anything that comes up during sprint retrospective that we want to incorporate in the next sprint, we can do it right away because sprint planning is coming right after. So maybe we overloaded the previous sprint and that's something that comes up in the retrospective. The moment to change that is right when we go into planning of the coming sprint. Throughout the week, we have the regular stand-ups, and then on the first week, we like to focus on backlog grooming. The backlog grooming is usually aimed at work that is coming up and not necessarily right away in the next sprint. It's more like a forward-looking grooming. And on the second week, we start thinking of the coming sprint. So we have sprint grooming. So again, grooming tickets, but specifically for the coming sprint. And we have tech planning, which is something that we introduced as a way to have better strategy and have a better or an easier sprint planning. So tech planning is essentially the development team meets and presents an overview of what's the strategy they will apply for their tickets in the coming sprint. So there's a bit of investigation that happens between the sprint planning on Tuesdays and the technical planning on Thursdays. This prep is on the development side. So one thing that has also helped us in I would say tuning our Agile ceremonies is besides trying to keep them short, or relatively short because an hour could be debated whether it's short or not, but it's good for the teams, has been setting clear owners and responsibility. So going to the meetings with the intent and the notion of what will happen in the meeting. So who will own the meeting? What's the expected output of the meeting? Who will be present and what we'll do during it. For example, I'll quickly go through the ones that have impacted us the most in terms of change and defining what we'll do in them. So for sprint grooming, the ownership is on the product side, and the expectation is that we leave sprint grooming with clear user stories, with acceptance criteria and scenarios. For technical planning, the ownership is on the development side, so we own setting up the ceremony and making sure that we have the accurate results that we want at the end of it. And for the sprint review, the development team, or the development part of the Cougar team also owns the ceremony, and what we basically want to have is a demo as the output of the working iteration that happened during that sprint. So shorter ceremonies, efficient meetings, and clear owners and clear output on what we want for each of them. So next, and related to this obviously, is how do we set up this in the context of the project that we want to work on, which is the client profile redesign. So we try to always aim for incremental iteration. The reason for that is we want to go from working state to working state at the end of each sprint. This allows the team to stay focused and to have a progress that is more visible. So they know what the end milestone is, but they're not always thinking about the end milestone. What they can think of in like a closer look is what I need to do for this sprint, for the end of the sprint. And so they're able to see their own progress at the end of the sprint if we go from functional iteration to functional iteration, and it acts as a feedback of their own work. So they're proud of the work that they've done during the sprint, and it's something that they can showcase, rather than spending weeks working on something, and then you sort of could get lost in the middle and not really know, what you're tracking against or what your goal is.
So we've looked at Team Cougar, we met the team, we've seen their project, we've seen how they operate in terms of their Agile ceremonies. Now we're going to look at how the team sets goals within the broader context of the company Lavastida. So probably all of you who work at companies have maybe a similar process where there's goal setting at different levels. So first we might have goal setting at the top level, or at the company level. But then teams have to take that and translate that into what does that mean for me? What does that mean for our team and the work that we're doing? How does that fit into a bigger picture? And then finally, we want to always keep those goals visible, again, to keep that motivation so teams can see how they're progressing and how they're contributing. So let's look at some examples. So at Lavastida, we work with OKRs, or objectives and key results. So a top-level objective might be, for example, we are the category leader in the European market. Well, then how do we measure that? How do we know we're the leader? So we have a few key results. One of them might be, we deliver $1 million by closing the gaps in our current product. So then Team Cougar then hears these objectives, these key results, and has to figure out, well, how does my client redesign project fit into this picture? And they may set their goal as revamp our client profile to close 4 feature gaps, for example. And so we saw what some of those feature gaps were when Zilia introduced the project. So now Team Cougar has their goal about closing the gaps. Now they have to break that down into their milestones and their sprints. So one milestone might be just restructuring the menu, but keeping the content the same on the app. And that might take 1 sprint. Another milestone might be revamping the care documentation into the 2 areas, care delivery, care management. Each of those might take a sprint. And then you might have a 3rd milestone where they're working on the client information, specifically the demographics, and that might take 1 sprint. So we've broken down the company objective down to the team goals and how they're going to break down their work.
One thing that we also like to incorporate in terms of goals for the sprint teams is a bit of sparks of gamification. And you might be wondering, why do we do that? So the reason is everybody likes playing games. Everybody likes winning when they're playing games. And so we want our teams to feel in a similar way when they look at our sprints. We want them to be motivated. We want to motivate healthy competition between the team members so that they challenge each other in delivery. So a few of the examples of things that we do when we're setting up our sprints during planning is, okay, what items do we want to aim for? Let's say we're going to celebrate the person that completes the first 2 tickets in the sprint. So it could be something specific like that, or it could be who's the person that will have completed 50% of the work by the time the first week ends. And yes, this sparks the pace. It makes the pace go higher in the first week, but what about the second week? And that's where we could go into, we sometimes go into more general ones, like who was the person that was the MVP player of the sprint, and that's usually chosen by the team itself. So it could have been, we had escalations that came into the sprint, so this was work that wasn't really slotted for, but we still absorbed it, and basically who was the person that helped with this the most, or a team member was struggling and was maybe not able to complete all their work, but somebody jumped in and was able to help. So whether it's specific, whether the targets are specific or they're more general in terms of how we're doing in the sprint, we like to play with that so that the team feels motivated.
Okay, so we've looked at the goals that they've set for themselves, we've broken down the work, and they're ready to go. So now, how does Team Cougar measure as they're going along that they're on track, they're in progress? And as managers, how do we look at how the team's doing? Or as directors, how do we look at how multiple teams are doing? So let's dive a bit into some metrics. We'll start looking at software development metrics. Some of these might be familiar to you. The ones in gray actually come from what is called the DORA metrics, or DevOps Research and Assessment. This is actually a Google concept that was done a few years ago after they looked at research, what metrics really have the most impact. And the pink ones are ones that we added Alia Care based on a tool that we use called Velocity by Code Climate, where we look at the software development lifecycle and some key metrics there. And we can divide these into two big groups. The top one is velocity, so how fast are we going to achieve what we need to achieve. And the second part is reliability, so the changes that we're doing, the changes to the application, what's the quality, what's the reliability, how is it being received in production, and are there bugs and escalations. So just diving into these more specifically, development frequency is how often that we successfully deploy to production. Lead time for change is how much time does it take for a specific commit to get into production. Review speed could be PR resolution, so when you first open a PR to the first comment. And then PR throughput is how many merged PRs are in a specific period of time. And then on the quality or the reliability side, it's what's our change failure rate? What is the percentage of deployments that cause problems in the field? So that could be an incident or major escalations. And if there is such a case, what is our time to restore service? So how long does it take for service to be back up and running? So a team might look at this, a manager and a QA might look at this and decide, okay, well, if we have a problem with review speed, so the time between an open PR and when it gets the first comment, let's deep dive there and see, are the developers too busy? Are there too many interruptions? So it's really important to look at these in the context of the bigger picture. So we've looked at software metrics, but now we want to look at the project as a whole. So how is the client profile redesign going? And executives will often ask on status updates. So we can look at this at different levels. We can go down to the epic level, so really looking at one particular aspect, like address validation in the demographics in the map. We can then look at it at a bigger level, so multiple epics towards our client redesign, and we can look at just Team Cougar, we can look at multiple teams into a whole domain. And what we found is the most effective is to really have that information in one source of truth, one place, which is Jira. And so we update the project health and any notes about the project. And we define project health pretty simply. So if the project's green, it's on track. If it's yellow, it has issues, but they can be resolved. And if it's red, it's because the project has significant issues. So if the projects are yellow or red, we make sure that the team updates the project notes. And again, you can use queries to bubble up whatever level of detail that you want. You can look at all the red projects, all the yellow ones, and then have all that project note information all in one place instead of having a status update in Excel, another one in PowerPoint. Here you have one source of truth. So that works really well for us.
In terms of metrics, we also specifically follow metrics from Jira. So when we're looking at progress in the sprint, we look at burn down charts and we try to see, okay, from the work that was planned for this sprint, how are we doing? How much has been completed? What's our probability to hit the target that we set? We also look at, is there any scope creep that has arrived? So that could be escalations, it could be something as part of a ticket that is being worked on, wasn't initially specified, but now we want to include it, so that would also fall on scope creep. And we usually look at what this sprint means for the overall epic progress. We don't look at it like in every day during the sprint, it's mostly like beginning and ending, so that the team sort of can have a mental idea of where they stand compared to the epic. For planning the sprints themselves, we look at the velocity of the team. So we take into account that metric, or the average of the velocity that they've completed that they've had over the past sprints, so that we can plan closer to what the team's delivery actually is. For sprint health, like I said, it's a mix of what's the work that has been completed, items that we still haven't been able to prioritize, and how much time is left on the sprint, so how many days are left. If we see that there's delays, we tend to look at average time and status. And so here we try to spot trends in when things are taking really long and why. So in the first graph, we could see what's taking really long, or the spikes in this case are in review. So it could be the pull request, it could be the person that was going to be the reviewer is no longer available, and in that case we tried to see how we can change that and how we can reorganize. If we realize the changes for what's taking really long is actually validation, this could be a blocker on the QA side, it could be a blocker on the product side, and so we aim at trying to course correct that.
Other metrics we look at in terms of quality or reliability are the number of, however you want to call it, bugs or defects or escalations. So we create dashboards per team, and again, multiple teams, looking at how many tickets were created over a specific period of time versus how many are resolved. So the top left here, the red bars would be how many are created over a week-long period, and the green bar would be how many are resolved of those that were created that week. Whereas the other chart that shows over a period of time is how many were created, but how many were resolved of those created this year. So you might have fixed a bug that was an old bug that may have taken a long time. So we look at those two metrics. We also have a calendar view where we can see when the defects were raised exactly. And what's interesting there is that you can often correlate that with the day of a release. So if there was a major release or a patch or a hot fix, you can really see, are there defects kind of clustered around that date? And the color is also the priority or the severity of the issue. We can look at average age, so how long are escalations or defects open? How long does it take us to actually address them and close them? And then we have work here at the bottom, which I'll talk about. This is a work in progress relating to root causes. So again, looking at some of the key things that we measure are how many are created versus resolved, what's the priority level of the defect, so what we call the blast radius, what's the impact that the defect had, did it cause many care workers to not be able to do their job, that would be an example, how long has the defect been open or its age, and again, root causes. So what I find most interesting is escalations are usually some problem in process. We don't like to point fingers, it's usually somewhere a process failed. And so what we like to do is kind of come up with a list of kind of key areas that keep popping up that cause for escalations. So the list we've come up with that most often occur are, we could be missing a manual test scenario, we could be missing unit tests, it could be a missing requirement that was not captured. It could be missing a process overall. So if there's like a handoff from one team to another, there might be a process broken there. It could be an issue with merging code with the different branches. It could be that there was a last minute change that kind of got slipped in and then maybe a full regression test was not done to check. Could be that a consequence of another team's change. So we have multiple teams, we have a web application and a mobile application. So a change that happened in one team on the back end may impact the mobile app, and maybe that's a test that has to be put in place. It could be a performance issue. So we onboard thousands of customers sometimes at a time, so you have to consider the load on your application. So then we introduce performance testing to make sure that our application can handle thousands of people coming on at once. Or it could be something else, and that we would require a comment. So we're trying to capture those as sort of structured data in Jira, so then we can aggregate them and look at where are the common problems happening. So in Team Cougar, for example, Miranda, the manager, might sit with Quentin, the QA, at the end of a sprint and look at the escalations that came in, and then maybe they found that unit tests and other teams' changes were having the most impact on the escalations that they saw in that sprint. So now we've looked at a lot of the metrics, how we measure agile metrics, escalations, etc. So based on that, sometimes we may have some problems that we've identified, and that might mean we need to have difficult conversations with the team or individuals.
So what does difficult conversations mean to us? It's basically keeping the team in the loop of what's going on. So is the project red? And in that case, what can we do to try to make sure we course correct? Is the project green, in which case we want to give good feedback? Is the project yellow? If it's yellow or red, we like to include the teams in the decisions that come next and in how we prioritize moving forward. For example, do we keep multiple items in flight, or do we prioritize completion? And one key benefit of including them in the conversation is, in order to decide whether we want to keep items, like multiple items in flight, or go towards completion of, let's say, 3 of the items we have in flight and leave the other 2 for later, is if we aim to do that, can we actually complete those items? And so the team confidence and the team input on that, whether that's a good strategy or not, is key to be able to course correct and achieve a good result when we course correct. Part of the conversations we also like to have with the team is related to maintenance, like how much maintenance work is happening in the team. And this is always, we like to look at it, but in the context of what the sprint is supposed to be for the team. Because, for example, we see maintenance as ratio of new work versus rework versus escalations that are coming from production that we can track to work that the team has output. And why this is important to always relate with what's happening in the sprint is you could be working on a new feature, and in that case you expect that there's less maintenance happening, but you could also be rewriting an existing feature, and in that case you would be by definition doing maintenance. So the question we ask ourselves is our throughput consistent with the footprint that we want to have in the sprint? So basically with the things that we're working on in the sprint. So for this, we use the velocity tool by Code Climate, not to be confused with velocity metric in Jira, though they're called the same. And so we use this tool to see where our code is going and how it is going. And we take this into consideration, again, together with what's going on in the sprint, so through Jira. The 3 key metrics that we look at are maintenance, activity, and retrospective. I'll go through them in a bit of detail. Essentially, maintenance is code changes that mean updating code that is older than 3 weeks. We work in 2-week sprints, so this means how much are we having to rewrite code that we have just written, essentially. In this graph, you can see there's multiple ways this can be interpreted. There's different things happening in different teams. In some cases, the maintenance level is really low. In some others, there's big spikes, around 40% or 30%. And the reason why, so this is illustrative, but it's always important to keep it together, again, with what your team is supposed to be working on, because this can be, without the context of, are you rewriting the client profile, or are you just writing, a completely new way of doing care plans? There could be a difference in how different teams in the same company and also different companies interpret the metrics. So for Dream 360 activity, here we have the chance to see where the team is spending their time. So we have 1 row per developer, and we can see how many PRs they're opening, how many commits, how many issues around comments have been worked on. And finally, retrospective. Retrospective lets us see, in particular, cycle time is one that we try to focus on, like how long are we taking from the moment an issue starts in progress to the moment it is resolved, whether it's a ticket of new work or it's the resolution for an escalation. We try to keep that in close mind. And then that's like on a more general team level. We also are big on encouraging individual conversations and inviting our team members to dialogue with us on how are things going? how are you doing overall? How do you feel around the work? Is there something holding you back from your potential? So when we meet with team members individually, we aim for a conversation. It's not just a one-side directed feedback loop. It's a two-way street. And we also consider giving them feedback when things are going well, not just when things need improvement or need change. Sometimes we tend to look too much into, oh, this needs improvement, or this could be done differently, but giving good feedback of when things are going well can go a really long way. It helps with team motivation. It helps them feel like they're actually impacting the work that the team is outputting. And then, we also look at maintenance individually, especially in cases where we can see there's, for example, a lot of escalations that can be tracked to work that was put by someone, that was done by someone, not with the aim of placing blame. It's a constructive conversation. It's a dialogue where what we want is to be able to move forward and see how we can fix, how we can update the things that may not be going well, and doing it together.
So we looked at these difficult conversations, if there are issues in the team, but again, you want to have those conversations when things are going well too, all in the aim of keeping the team members motivated. And another thing we find that really motivates the team is getting feedback from customers directly. Everyone wants to know what they're working on and what is the impact of that by our customers using the product. So how do our customers feel? Well, we measure that on a regular basis as a company with NPS, or Net Promoter Score, which is a widely used tool in the field. And that basically is asking your customers, would you recommend Alia Care to your colleague or other people in your same domain? So you get a number, and that number, you can look at it over time and see trends, but one number doesn't always give you all the information that you want. What you really want is context around that number, and so you can slice and dice it based on how you're gathering the data. You can slice and dice it and segment it in different ways. So one way, for example, is looking at personas. So who is using our software? We mentioned earlier we have schedulers using software, we have people working on billing and payroll, we have care clinicians who are managing the care delivery for our clients. So there's different personas using our application, and we want to understand, for Team Cougar, who uses it most and how are they feeling about the product. So for example, Team Cougar learns that the schedulers might have a low Net Promoter Score, but the care coordinators have a high NPS and they really love the new client profile redesign. So by segmenting your NPS data in different ways, you can get information that you can then share back to your team specifically. And on a quarterly level, we bring the whole company together for our quarterly alignments, and we share this feedback in a public space with everyone. So we get testimonials such as, I love how easy it is to see the information I need in the place I need it most, from generic company ABC. So Team Cougar hears this and they're really excited about the work that they just did, and that really motivates them to continue delivering in their best way. So now we looked at how customers feel, and then we'll also look at how the team feels. This is always done in the retro, as Zilia mentioned earlier, one of the Agile ceremonies. So every sprint, or maybe every couple of sprints, they'll do a team retro. They'll look at what was thumbs up, what was thumbs down, any areas we can improve, and any recognition team members might want to give each other. But then we also aggregate that and look at quarterly retros. So the team gets together and looks at some of the metrics we were talking about earlier. So they might look at, did we achieve the outcomes we were supposed to? Did our epics reach the status that we aimed at the start of the quarter? How did we do in our sprint velocities over time? How many escalations did we have, et cetera. So it helps the team reflect on what they did and then motivate them for work coming up in the next quarter. So let's bring together everything that we talked about today. So we started by introducing Team Cougar and the project that they worked on, which was the client profile redesign. We did a deep dive into the Agile ceremonies, so how the team operate and which ceremonies are key, keeping them short, and also making sure that they have clear owners, clear expectations on who attends them, and clear output expectations. Then we looked at goal setting. So how do we set goals at a company level? How does the team then break that down into goals for their project? And then how do they break that down into different sprints? We then looked at some metrics measuring how we're doing as we go. So that could be software development metrics. That could be agile ceremony metrics. That could be escalations, bugs, defects. So there's a lot you could look at to measure as you're going, as well as project health. And then based on those outputs, we can then look at having conversations with the team or individuals on any areas that need improvement. And then we like to keep that motivation high for the teams by getting feedback from our customers, really seeing the impact of what they do and how that's being received in the field.
And last but not least, we want to end today with the notion that we use in our teams, which is the end is only the beginning. So today we shared a few of the things that work for us in our sprints in the hope that you can get inspired by some of those and maybe apply them on your day-to-day work, whether it's sprint related or not. And we always see the end of the sprints as the opportunity of, in terms of how do we improve for the next sprint. So it's only the beginning of the next adventure. Thank you.